Hello, and welcome to the Wicker Library. My name is Aaliyah, so glad you can be here with us today. I'm very excited to bring you all my favorite books of 2023 list. I have picked out 23 books that I've read this year that I need to talk about. I need to rave about. I need to push my agenda on the world. And you are the world. So congrats, you get to be blessed by my book taste. And yeah, I have decided to organize them by genre. So there will be timestamps below if you want to skip to certain genres of your choice, or you could just watch it all the way through. So let's just jump right in. So let's begin with a little disclaimer. I have technically read 93 books thus far, but I am still several days away from the end of 2023, and I think I might finish 2 more books by the end of this year, just because I'm near the end of them. One of them might make it to this list, so I'll mention it, and that is The Late Americans by Brandon Taylor. I'm reading it, I'm loving it, we all know this, and I'll talk about Brandon Taylor more because he's on this list naturally. So before that, though, let's get into my favorite nonfiction that I've read this year. Starting off with Braiding Sweetgrass by Kimmerer. This book is so beautifully written. It's a collection of essays that is about indigenous ecology, indigenous wisdom. There's stories woven throughout, but it's mostly focusing on the lives and the wisdom of plants and the world around us, the living world around us, and it is just so good. It is so beautiful and educational and hopeful. Those are the words that come to mind immediately. It is very slow, which I don't mind at all. It took me months to finish it, but that's because I read it in bits and pieces, and I only picked up an essay at a time, and I would go weeks without reading it, and then I'd pick up the book and just love it again. And I think that is the best way to read it, because some of the essays are rather repetitive, and I know that's a criticism of the book and it's valid, but the way I read it, it didn't hinder the experience at all, and it was definitely a favorite. The next book I want to talk about is Disfigured on Fairy Tales, Disability, and Making Space by Amanda Leduc. It talks about disability studies and its connection to fairy tales and folklore and their representations of disabled characters throughout history. And there's so much history in this book, but there's also, it's written like it's fiction, which I love, and it makes me want to pick up Amanda Leduc's actual fiction stories. I think I would love them. And the writing was so lyrical, but also it wasn't too dense. I know nonfiction can sometimes get really dense, and all of these books that I'm mentioning for this category aren't at all, and they're all very accessible, especially this one. The point of it is really accessibility, and I think it just did a remarkable job. Everyone should read it. I love it so much. I read it earlier in this year, and it has still stuck with me. I wrote one, thesis final in one of my classes on it. It's remarkable. It's 10 out of 10. Everyone needs to read it. The final book in this category is They Can't Kill Us Until They Kill Us by Hanif Abdurraqib. This book is phenomenal. I need to reread it. I know I read it earlier this year and I don't retain enough of it, but I do remember the feelings I felt while reading. And this author, oh, by the way, this is a collection of essays on music. That's really all you need to know going in, and if you don't think you're a music fan, don't worry, pick it up anyway, because Hanif Abdurraqib writes in a way that makes you care about things you may have never cared about before. Not to say I've never cared about music, but to the level that he does, I've never cared about music. But reading these essays, you get so attached and you're just immediately put into his headspace and his love for music. And it's not just about music, that's just the surface level. It goes into so many stories, and it's so hard to encapsulate just all of the emotions, all of the feelings this book made me feel. Everyone should read They Can't Kill Us Until They Kill Us. It is worth all of the hype in the world. It's worth much more, in my opinion, and it's just It's phenomenal. It's just so good, okay? I can't express to you how good this writing style is, how accessible it is, and just, I don't know, the man can write, and yeah, he can write, okay? We are all collectively going to ignore the fact that I changed. It got really warm in here all of a sudden. But we are going into literary fiction next, and let's start off with my first read of 2023, which was How Beautiful We Were by mbue. The craft of this book was truly marvelous, and it started off my reading year, and I almost want to thank it for starting off my reading year so strong, because I think that just carried through for the rest of the year. It was so good. It follows multiple generations of families and people who are being oppressed in this fictional but not fictional country in Africa, and they're being oppressed by all these oil companies that are coming in and stealing their land, stealing their resources, killing their children, their people. And it is a very real book because a lot of the things are happening currently, have been happening for years, but the way it is crafted is so perspective shifting. It's so hard to really, truly express to you. It's one of those books that I think everyone should just go into with an open mind and just want to read, because it's brilliantly written. The characters just tug you along with them, and you don't want to let go. By the end of the book, I didn't want to let go, and I think that's really all I can say about this. There's so many better reviews online, but I think everything's been said about this book, and it's all worth it, and I think everyone should read it if they are able to. The next book we have is Bellies by Nicola Dinan. This book was remarkable. It is a debut story. I cannot wait to pick up everything and anything this writer puts out next. This was such a brilliant story about 20-somethings just trying to figure out life. There's so much queerness in this story. There's so much found family. And again, it's so character-driven. I am a big character-driven novel person, so you'll probably recognize that in a lot of my favorites. They focus on characters rather than plot, and this book did not have that much plot going on, but it had so much heart in the characters, and it is such a good character study on messy characters. If you liked kind of the messiness that went on with books like Detransition Baby by Torrey Peters, I think that's her name, if you like characters who fuck up and are messy and are just so, the decision making is so difficult to stand by, but you still are rooting for them, just read this book. You will love it. It is also really funny at parts, but also made me sob uncontrollably. So do with that what you will and pick up this book. As promised, we have come to our Brandon Taylor book, and that is Filthy Animals. I have talked this book into the ground on my channel. I know everyone's aware that it's going to be on this list. It's a short story collection that takes a glimpse at several different characters and their lives and their connections with one another, and it is just brilliant. Okay, it is fantastically written. I love his writing so much, especially when he goes into a book with this kind of form where it is a novel, but it's also almost like short stories. Each chapter will follow a different perspective, a different person, but then you see the people interact and come into each other's lives, and it's so good, okay? Brandon Taylor is a master at building connections between characters and making the characters so endearing and enthralling, and again, messy characters. They do things that you would not agree with all the time. You know they're real, and I feel like that sounds so dull, just to be like, oh, they felt so real, but they do. It feels like you close the book and you've met a bunch of new people that you can talk about and talk to, and they're not real, and it hurts a little bit. But yeah, this one was phenomenal. I'm also reading The Late Americans, which is written in a similar style to Filthy Animals and his other book, Real Life. Brilliant. Love it. I think Filthy Animals so far still takes the cake, but I'm not done with The Late Americans yet. So I could change my mind, but as of right now, I wanted to put filthy animals rather than filleted Americans. We have come to the next genre, which I have labeled literary horror. I don't know if that's what it is, but the book to start it off is The Salt Grows Heavy by Cassandra Khaw, and this was expertly written, okay? It creeped me out, but it was this folkish fairy tale reframing of The Little Mermaid. Like, it's not a fairy tale retelling, it is so much more, and it's this short but compact, and it packed such a punch, and it was so gory and good and weird, and it stuck with me. It was just so good. It was so creepy and eerie, and I think everyone should read it. I don't think everyone should read it. I think people who really like body horror and folklore should definitely pick it up. It's also so queer, and I did not know that going in. It was fantastic. The final book of this category, and also the second, I only had 2 top books, is Bestiary by K-ming Chang. I would also put this author's book Organ Meats, which recently came out. I also got an arc of that. I think I liked Bestiary a bit more, which is why I'm putting it as my official pick, but Organ Meats was equally as weird and fever dream-like. Bestiary is about so many things. It's really difficult to explain. I went in not knowing anything. I went in just for the vibes of the cover, and one of my good friends recommended this author's work, and so I trusted them, and I'm so happy I did. Again, this writing is a fever dream. You don't have to understand what's going on. I think if you go in trying to wrap your head around everything, you're just going to have a difficult time. You're not going to have a good time. You'll be confused, things like that. But if you just go in being like, yeah, what's happening right now is just happening, you're going to have such a fun time. The writing, excellent. The characterization, very odd, but very real, very deep, so many layers. You can dig so deep. Literally, this book has a lot of digging in it. And it is also very gory, but in a different way. I hesitate to put it in horror. That's why I said literary horror, just because I could be pulling that out of my ass, but like literary horror seems like it fits it a little better, and it's magical realist, kind of surrealism is what I would definitely put it as. 10 out of 10. We know the rest. It was a great book. We have now gotten into our translated fiction section, and I love a good translated book. I would love to hear recommendations for more translated fiction that isn't Japanese or Korean, because those are currently just the most I've read, and I'd like to branch out. So any recommendations, I will take them. The weirder, the better. The more surrealist, the more odd, the more mundane even. Just give it all to me, please. But let's start out with Almond by won-pyung sohn, which was translated from Korean by Sandy Joosun, I believe is their name, and I read this on audiobook. Would highly recommend an audiobook. I forget who it's narrated by, but they did such a great job bringing it to life, and this book takes a look at boyhood and goes into the story of this child who feels emotions very differently than everyone else his age, and he feels them in a much more tamed back way. I don't want to say he doesn't feel any emotions at all, because that's really not true, but he feels them in a very different way, and it's just about his life. There's a lot of violence that happens in this book, and a lot of just heavy grief and heavy storytelling, but it's so beautiful and heartbreaking. And if you just enjoy a mundane look at a very specific person and a very specific point in their life, you would love this. The next book I have is People from My Neighborhood by Hiromi Kawakami, translated by Ted Goossen from Japanese. And this book took me by surprise. I picked it up in a bookstore in Mystic, Connecticut with my dad, because my dad liked the colors on the book, and I was like, so true. And I got it on a whim, and I read it, and it's this short story collection about weird little things that happen in this weird little neighborhood, and you don't really know if the things are real or if it's just in the narrator's head. It's just so good. It's told in these vignettes, which is one of my favorite forms of storytelling ever. It's framed as a short story collection, and like it is, but it's more so a story told in vignettes that bounce around and has the same characters, similar to Filthy Animals, actually. And I think I'm realizing that I just really like short stories told in that way, where they all connect and have a through line somehow. But this book took me by surprise. I want to almost create an analogy with how I feel about it, where each vignette felt almost like a Wes Anderson vignette, if that makes sense, told in, I could see it being adapted in that way, super stylized and very just singular, if that makes sense. I think it would do so well in that form. Obviously it doesn't have to be Wes Anderson, but that's the first that comes to my mind in just visuals. It was weird, it was funny, it was satirical, and just bizarre. That's the word I would use for this book, and I loved it so much. The final book in this category was Sweet Bean Paste, and that book is by Durian Tsukugawa, and this was translated by Allison Watts from Japanese as well. This book was so sad, but so heartwarming at the same time. It's one that you finish and you're left feeling very empty but very full. Just a bunch of contradictions. That's what this book feels like. And it follows this one guy, and he's just down on his luck. He is making these little pastries, and he meets this older woman. A friendship ensues, very platonic friendship and very familial found family elements of the story. And it was so warm, very sweet. It's very short, and yeah, it was a good time, even though it made me cry. We have come to the largest section, and the most surprising one, because this is my fantasy/sci-fi section, which is crazy for me, okay? Because that is, up to now, has been my least favorite genre. I didn't think I liked it anymore, and I was wrong. I think I just needed to discover adult fantasy and not YA fantasy. That's not a diss on YA fantasy. I had my time with that, and I loved so many YA fantasy books, and there are still some that intrigue me, but just with how my reading tastes have changed, especially recently, I have been finding myself drawn to more adult books, more darker books, things like that. But let us begin with The Last Tale of the Flower Bride by Roshni Chokshi. This book was so good and has one of the best plot twists I've read in a long time. This one follows obsession and girlhood, and it's split perspective, and that's all I want to tell you about it going in, because I think it's so good to go in not knowing much, not knowing what's going on, except that something is wrong. And I think it did such a good job of encompassing growing up, and growing up specifically when you were obsessed with fairies and folklore and other worlds out there, like I was. I think it would really resonate with you. And yeah, female friendships that go a little far, a little past friendship, and also a little past okay and morally correct, but you know, it's just what the girlies are up to. Next, I want to talk about what could be argued as my favorite book of this year. Why am I putting it in the middle of a random list? I don't know. It's because if I think too hard about it, I could find other books that I thought I liked more, but then I think hard again, and this cannot be topped. And that is Babel by R.F. Kuang. This book is brilliance encompassed, okay? It is so dense with world building and character development and political commentary and commentary in general, just about so many different things. And the writing, phenomenal, fantastic, cannot be beat. It just cannot be beat, okay? And Babel follows this magical world that is very based in our own. It's historical fantasy, I would say. It's so vast. I should be reading just the back of this book because it's so hard to just explain. from the top of my head, but there's magical things that go on with silver, and there's so much that happens with translation and language and world building and things like that, and then commentary on capitalism, but also colonialism, imperialism, and so much. And people do a better job at explaining this book than I am right now, because there's so much I want to say and none of it is coming out of my mouth. It's like I just cannot express how much I love this book, how well written it is, and yeah, I love this book. We have changed up the lighting because it was getting really dark, and no one is going to comment on it. And if you do, I'll delete your comment. This is my channel, my rules, okay? Getting into my next fantasy favorite, and that was A Psalm for the Wild Built by Becky Chambers. This is technically science fiction, but it can definitely be classified as cozy fantasy. That's a list I've put it on before, and others have as well. And this follows a monk and a robot, and they become friends. And this world I want to live in. This book for me is the epitome of that TikTok sound where it's just, I want to go to there. I want to go to here. I want to go to this book. I want to live in this book. It is a warm cup of tea. And it's been described as that before. Don't think I'm a poet for coming up with that, because I didn't. I stole it. But I think going into this book, expecting a good time, expecting a warm time, and maybe expecting to shed a few tears if you're a wimp, like I personally am. This book was so great, and the second one was great as well. And I cannot wait for more in the series, because there better be more in the series. That is a threat. The next one we have is, of course, Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies by Heather Fawcett. I've talked about this book before. I've talked about the second book and how much I loved it equally. I was, again, lucky enough to get an arc of it, which I feel so happy about. And this book is so good. And I would describe it as Spiderwick Chronicles meets Howl's Moving Castle. The main love interest is very similar to Howl, and I love it. Okay, I love it so much. And the main character is very similar to Sophie as well. And this book, I love the fairies in this book. I am a fairy girl, I should preface this, I'm like an OG fairy girl, like the Tinkerbell, the Pixie Hollow, the Spiderwick Chronicles. So I have loved fairies and fairy tales since I was little. I have grown up on them. I have grown up believing in them. And fairies I'm in love with. I'm not totally in love with the fairy, like Sarah J. Maas kind of fairy, where it's like mates and things like that. That's not personally what I enjoy, but you can, I guess. Sorry, that sounds so like bitchy, but I love the fairies that are kind of twisted and trickstery and dark, and this book has those types of fairies in it, and I loved how fleshed out the world was. I loved the characters, their dynamic with one another, and I loved all of it. For the final book of this category, we have In Other Lands by Sarah Reese Brennan. I read this very early on in the year, and I have a whole reading vlog that I will link for it. This is a book that is very self-aware and almost reaching satirical. It takes these tropes of the chosen one, of the even romance tropes and things like that, and it totally twists them on their head. It is so much fun. It follows Elliot, who is just a piece of shit, but we love him. He is us, all of us. I'm saying us mostly because this is one of my best friend's favorite books, and I read it with her. So it was a really fun time, and this book is going to hold a place in my heart for a very long time. And it's one that I also think you should go in not knowing, not expecting too much, because the main character doesn't expect or know anything at all. He's very silly and stupid, but also smart in very niche, weird ways. But anyway, characters in this are so lovable, found family galore, truly. And the romance in this book is one of my favorites, and also one that took me quite by surprise. And it shouldn't have, but I was gaslit by my friend, so it did take me by surprise, and it was a very good time. Now, the next category we have is YA and romance. Two categories that I think I'm going to be sort of stepping away from in 2024. That's not to say I won't be picking up these genres ever again. I think I need a break, okay? It's not a breakup, it's not a divorce, but we just need a break, okay? Especially me and YA this year. We have had some tough times, but we also did have some gems, starting off with Red Martin Ruins It All by Amanda Dewitt. All that I've written in my notes here is idiot and in parentheses endearingly. That's how I feel about the main character of this book. That's how I feel about this book. It was just so endearing. It follows an asexual character, and his plan is to ruin the prom equivalent at this school because he thinks it's ridiculous, he thinks it's bad, and I agree with him, but also he is so silly and oblivious the entire time, and I love him so dearly. Got an early copy of it, which I felt so lucky for. I now have an owned copy that isn't technically mine because I gifted it to my mom, but it was a grand old time, and this book made me so happy. Now going into a book that made me equally happy as it did really sad was Solitaire by Alice Oseman. Alice Oseman has once again created a character that I see myself in so much that it hurts. It's not in a comforting way. Well, it is, but it doesn't feel comforting when I'm reading about Torrey Spring and just being like, how the hell, Alice, did you get into my home? Did you get into my room, my head even, and just know so much of how I've felt, how I feel. It's how I felt with reading Radio Silence, maybe to a lesser extent, but they're comparable, which is crazy because Radio Silence is one of my favorite books of all time. I've read it multiple times and it just means so much to me, especially the character of Aled Last. And Solitaire just, it follows Torrey Spring, and she's a very sad teenager, but she has a lot of love for her younger siblings, for some of her friends, and it's a coming of age story. It's pretty typical. It definitely won't hit everyone the same, and it is Alice's debut book. I think Alice has grown so much as a writer since this, but I still just have such a fondness for this book and its characters, and it's really hard to explain without just oversharing, so I won't. But Solitaire is just me for real. That's all I got. Next, we have probably one of the only YA romances that I will go to war for, okay? I will protect this book with everything, and that is Highly Suspicious and Unfairly Cute by Talia Hibbert. Talia's ability to write chemistry and write characters' banter and also give both of the love interests depth and a characterization outside of each other is so refreshing and so nice. And Highly Suspicious and Unfairly Cute follows two characters, and they were friends at one point, then something happened, we find out later in the book, and they are now enemies, and they are put into a situation where they have to work together. So do with that what you will. It is such a fun, wholesome time, and I laughed so much while reading, and this book was just so much fun. Coming to the final book, and that is an adult romance titled The Charm Offensive by Alison Cochrane. And listen, this book was a mess, and it was the best. And I had such a good time with it. I cried during it. I didn't cry for normal reasons. This is another book that just read me for filth. And I don't want to get into it, okay? I don't want to get into it. But I do have a reading vlog where I read this book and cry. I don't think I cry on camera, but I do cry. I promise. And this book just it makes me feel so warm and so loved, and it was such a funny time. It was such a fun time. It was such a frustrating time. It follows these two characters, and it is split perspective, which I feel personally is the only way you can write romance. I don't want to read one head. If I'm in romance, just shut up, don't write that. That's really harsh, but I mean it. And this book follows one character who is the producer of a Bachelor-like show, and then it follows the Bachelor, but the producer and the Bachelor end up falling in love instead. And it's a fantastic time. It's very hyped. I think it's deserving of the hype. I'm excited to read Alison Cochran's other book. I have it, I own it, and I'm excited to read it, although I'm also a little scared to read it. But this one was such a fun time, and I don't even want to get into it because I don't want to think about crying again. But it was a great time, and I would highly, highly recommend it. We have come to the final genre of books, and I've placed it at the finale because I've talked these books into the ground. Okay, and that is these graphic novels. And let us begin with the best one, and also a contender for maybe just my favorite, but I don't know, it's hard. Again, I can't pick a favorite, but I can say that The Moth Keeper by Kay O'Neill is outstanding. It is brilliant, it is heartbreaking, and it is so warm and comforting to your inner child. I know that sounds very odd to say, but I think this book just does such a wonderful job of talking about loneliness and depression and the darkness that sometimes surrounds you and surrounds the people you love, and in a way that's very fantastical and warm and approachable to a young audience. It is middle grade, I believe, and I think it's approachable to any and every age, and the art is just the most beautiful, adorable shit ever, okay? It is beautiful to look at, it is so lovely to read, and it's gonna stick with me for a while. I know I'll be rereading it in the future. I might even try and reread it annually. I just had such a special time with this book, and I highly recommend it. Next, we have Mamo by Sas Milledge. This book was so well drawn out, and although the plot is rather based on dialogue, I had such a good time with it, okay? But Mamo by Sas Milledge follows a witch, and she's basically being followed by this kind of annoying girl who's asking so many questions all of the time, but the two of them are aiming to dig up some bones and save their little town, and it's a great time. It's a grand old time. There's cool looking crows and like fairy kind of creatures, and it's so much fun. I loved it so much. Now, for the final book, the 23rd favorite book of 2023, we have The Daughters of Wise by M.T. Anderson, illustrated by Joe Rue, and this book follows this kind of folk tale of these monsters of the sea being harnessed by this king and the kingdom, and it's bloody, it's dark. The illustrations are definitely my favorite part. The story's good, the story's intriguing, but the illustrations are really what carry the story and carry the characterization, I would even argue. It's so much fun to read, and I really want to reread it and just look at it again because it was such a good time, and I read it very quickly, and I'd like to take some more time with it on a reread, which is why I like to reread books, because I can read them with a new lens or in a new light. And yeah, this one was just so much fun, so good, so dark, and I think more people should be talking about it and reading it. It has been a really lovely year, and I'm really thankful for the reading year I've had, and that I've been healthy and rather happy. And so yeah, I'm hoping 2024 will be equally, if not better, for reading and things like that, and I'm really hoping to start to post more consistently, whether that means every other week consistently or every week consistently. I don't know yet. I don't know what I'm capable of, just with being a full-time student, having a job, probably going to try and get a second job for the new semester as well. So I don't know how much time I'll have on my hands, but I do enjoy doing these videos, chatting with you all. Feel free to leave a comment about how your reading year has gone, any books that you've loved, any books you've hated. I won't personally be doing a least favorite of 2023 reading video just because I like to forget about the books I didn't like. If you want to talk about books you've hated, feel free, and I will love to reply and see your comments. And if you've enjoyed this video, feel free to subscribe if you haven't already, like the video, and I will see you in the next one.